Once again, we have yet another Patreon listener question. If you are interested in joining the Patreon, just be sure to check the description below. We have tons of different tiers, and if you want to join the Patreon listener question tier, it is just $5, and you get to ask a question on the podcast. Join us on the Patreon. Might even get some cool stuff in the mail as a little gift, as a thank you. But as it stands right now, we got a Patreon we got to tackle here. And this one comes from Jason M, a.k.a. Trans Theory, and he wants to know, hey, Protoman, during the production of Transformers Age of Extinction, there was a character named Widowmaker. She would have taken the spot of Stinger in the movie. I was wondering why she was cut at the last minute and was replaced with the Stinger character, since she had a lot of concept art floating around on the web. And it looked like a lot of fans liked her, according to fan art of her online. Hope you enjoy the rest of your summer, Jason M. Okay, I'm very familiar with this character. She's come up a lot in a lot of questions and people wondering about unreleased characters and where they end up in the germination of stuff. Aaron Archer stated that even though he left Hasbro going into 2013, a lot of the production of Age of Extinction happened extremely early, even as late as as early as 2012. And he had a lot to do with that, and there was two major concept artists that were brought onto the team, Vitaly Burgaro and Steve Jung. Those were the two guys that were in charge of concept designing, concept art, and essentially what people need to understand is when there is concept art designs for the Transformers series, they're literally throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what will stick. All Hasbro knew at the time, that early on, was the Pagani Huayra, the car that would be Stinger, was a licensed car that was going to be part of the movie. They knew that much. They have to get those kind of things locked in early on. And I'm going to talk about licensing and stuff like that later on when it pertains to Widowmaker, because it leads to a lot of things you're going to have to understand later too. So they had the Huayra. They knew that this car was going to happen. It was this, supercar from 2012. So around the time when they were planning the movie, this car was like this new hotness. There was only 100 units in the world. It sold out instantly, and it wouldn't get a second run of units until 2017. A rich man, fancy car, straight up Michael Bay's alley of the stuff he likes to do. I mean, it goes all the way back to when we had Jazz with the Solstice and everything like that, and even with Bumblebee with that new Camaro. He likes to have those new cars in the movie. There was no major association with how this car was going to be used in the movie yet. Obviously, through the process of, again, throwing that stuff at the wall, Steve Jung showed this concept of here's the Huayra, but on this female character. Now, Steve Jung was a freelance designer, only worked on really Revenge of the Fallen prior to that. You could kind of credit him for the concept art of Skids and Mudflap. So thank him for those ones. But also did Ravage and parts of Devastator like Rampage and Hightower and stuff like that. But a lot of those concepts, even when you look at what Steve Jung did when those concepts existed, they were still in the early stages. Nothing was final, and the final products that would be Skids and Mudflap, and a lot of them went through different revisions and stuff through other artists. And again, it goes through Takara. They got to go, hey, could this be done as a toy? There has to be a logic behind it too. There's a whole process. And same thing, Vitaly, which was one of the other concept artists, kind of also tried a different take on the Widowmaker character and added different armor, used the same general aesthetic, but, different battle mask and stuff. All early concepts of what would be this character if it would be used in the movie. Now, the question that is asked here is, why was it cut at the last minute? The thing is, it actually wasn't really cut at the last minute. Widowmaker was just one of these, like, hey, why don't we try this, and will Takara receive it well? Do you think maybe the studios will receive it well? Even Michael Bay has a small little say in it, and of course Hasbro and the toy designers. And obviously during some part they probably felt, again looking at scripts and everything, they wanted to have an evil counterpart to Bumblebee, and the Huayra was going to be that. So you even see that with some of the early toy production of what would be Stinger later, where sometimes they're using that Bumblebee mold. Sometimes they're using pre-existing Transformer Prime mold. Sometimes they're using the actual Wyra as an original toy. Actually, he wouldn't get a decent toy until years later, but for the longest time, it was just kind of repaints and one steps that actually did the Wyra license. It was complicated. Complicating it more would be, let's say, we'll play devil's advocate here, that Widowmaker made it to the finalized process. Still wouldn't be able to happen, and I'll tell you why from something that I have personal experience working within that brand. Trademarking. We always talk about this on the podcast, and trademarking is a big part of it. Now, if they would have called this character Widowmaker, they would have already hit a wall, because at the time Blizzard was in 2013 working on a video game. Some kind of video game. And in 2014, they patented a ton of trademarks for their characters. That video game would go on to be called Overwatch. And there would be a character that would be patented and trademarked in 2014 called Widowmaker because they were going to do a master toy license with Funko and Figma. Now, while trademarking in Japan is not that big a deal for Figma, Funko had to lock in those trademarks, and they locked in Widowmaker in February of 2014. So they would not be able to use that Widowmaker name because Blizzard's Funko license with their product, which would end up being Funko Pops, statuettes, little figures, all the little things that they do, would fall under that toy trademark for a Widowmaker. Obviously, that the irony in that was that trademark would expire in 2017, and then Hasbro, oddly enough, would get the Overwatch license, and in 2019 have plans for product and stuff. So that's kind of ironic in that, is ultimately in the end Hasbro got that trademark. But it shows that even then, if they wanted to go the full distance, it couldn't have happened. But then when we look at the design, was Hasbro ready to do something that was so human looking? With the next movie, we'd end up having, Quintessa, and she'd have a much more human looking design with a mysterious origin. I guess they just didn't want to go that route. And again, when you look at all kinds of past concept art from any of the Transformer movies from the Bayverse, they all look fairly different, number one, than what their final counterparts are. And number two, a lot of them even had prototype names that didn't see through. So even Widowmaker, I don't think that would have been her name. They would have probably went with something that was a lot more trademarkable, something that would work out. Heck, the name Widowmaker is related to heart attacks and stuff too. So I think they would have probably want to go with something else. For all we know, they would have called her Nightbird. Who knows? They would have went with a trademark that they could use in the long run. And in relation to her looking a lot like Shatter, that's actually kind of a pure coincidence more than anything. Joshua Veers was actually the concept artist on the Bumblebee movie. And if you actually looked at his concept art for the Bumblebee movie, his Shatter, like in the early stages of planning, was vastly different than what the final product was. She wasn't going to be a triple changer. She was just going to be a muscle car. She didn't have her reddish pink kind of color scheme. She had more of a muted black and white, which no doubt, again, those colors were changed. They weren't going to keep that muted black and white, again, early concept art, because shelf appeal is always a very important thing. For people who don't know what shelf appeal is, it's how a character looks when it's grouped in with its other related characters. So Bumblebee has to be yellow, Dropkick is blue, Shatter's that reddish pink. You have to have that separations. You can't just have two yellow characters and whatever. And that goes back again to Age of Extinction. Stinger, it's going to be the evil red to Bumblebee's yellow. There was, obviously from a trademarking standpoint, if you want to go back to Widowmaker with Overwatch, there was going to be a Rise of a Darkspark video game with Stinger being a major character in it. It's another trademark that wouldn't have worked with an Overwatch trademark. It gets really complicated. It really does. Long answer short, wasn't cut at the last second of the movie. Was really just cut kind of early when they were just playing with ideas. And Stinger was the one that they were really more married to early on, because then you go into script and story. You can't really look at script and story until much later. Designs are usually done first and stuff is wrapped around it, because designs really are some of the first stuff that have to be put together. Designs, molding, trademarking, all those things have to be planned out way in advance. And then you do the story and you plug in everybody here and there. Why do you think so many Decepticons are created in these movies and killed off just as quick? Because they're designed early on, and then when the movie's put together, they go, well, let's stick him here and he'll die there. Let's stick him here and he'll die there. It's the unfortunate process of how these movies are put together. I mean, people don't realize music and voice acting are some of the last things that are actually put in for the Transformers. So it's all kind of done unfortunately in post. But that being said, like, that's the unfortunate truth of Widowmaker, was she was just an idea that just kind of never really happened. And even if she would have happened, there would have been a lot of hurdles along the way. And Stinger really was the idea that they wanted to go with originally, just an evil counterpart, Bumblebee. You know, Bumblebee, but better, I think was the quote in the movie. You know, better than him in every way from the KSI, you know, team. And that's what the whole idea was behind it, where being what Widowmaker was would have not really played into that. But even then, to look that far down in terms of characterization and story is way beyond what that character would have been afforded, considering that this thing was probably cut way on the cutting room floor before anything was going to be considered in terms of its place in the story. They just knew there was going to be a Wyra, a Pagani Wyra, stick a design to it, see what happens. Oh, female character, we're not going to do that just yet. We're going to go somewhere else. And the rest is history. So that's the long and short of Widowmaker. Obviously, it has a fan. She has a fan following, primarily because, hey, female Transformer character in the Bayverse and the movieverse. Not many of those that really have any kind of screen time, really. So it's going to get a lot of attention. But at the end of the day, you know, it's just one of those many designs that we got to see and then kind of never happened in the end. And it's something that maybe one day, if they want to have fun, they might revisit it in a comic book or something, make it a background character. But at the end of the day, it's just something that's kind of floating in the background. Who knows? Maybe one day, just like Sunstorm and Acid Storm and some of the more obscure background characters and concept characters and even animation mistakes. That's what Slipstream was, an animation mistake turned into a real character. She was the lady in purple from episode 2 of More Meets the Eye. It's something that maybe one day Widowmaker will find some place in the future in Transformer product if there's someone that's a really big fan of it that wants to make it happen. But yeah, that's the long short answer. Hope it answers your question, Jason M. And once again, if you are interested in asking a Patreon listener question like Jason over here, be sure to check the description below and jump into the craziness that is the Transformers Slag podcast, where we will give you the facts and the truth of what's going on with our crazy hobby.